Hey guys, what is up and welcome back to another video. Today we are here for episode 112 of Goattville updates, and now finally marks the completion of perhaps the largest build I've ever completed before in Minecraft. I started working on the zoo 3 years ago in July of 2019, and since then around 6 months total of on and off progress has finally led to today, where I feel rather confident in saying that I am completely done with this project. Regardless of what more mobs come to Minecraft in the future, I am too proud of how well this build came out to consider it to be unfinished for any time longer. Here's what the zoo looks like on the map, where you can see that it clearly takes up a good portion of the city area, and measuring about 500 meters from north to south and about 250 meters from west to east, it's very much apparent that this is the largest singular build in this world. Now, unlike some other zoos I've seen other people build, I'll mention now that this one does not feature any kind of mod. All the animals included in this build are default Minecraft animals and entities. I know some people were disappointed by that last time, but the approach of this world that I'm building, with this zoo included, take up this almost neoclassical interpretation of Minecraft building, so therefore I thought the default Minecraft mobs would be fitting here. That's just a quick disclaimer I thought I should put in before we begin on this tour, just to explain to anyone wondering. Now, before we get into the zoo, we'll start at the back, which is where I have all the parking set up. The front of the zoo is nearby a downtown area for the city, so not only would a massive parking lot not look right there, but also I just kind of forgot to designate a space for parking before I started building. So we got a couple lots and a humble little parking garage set up all the way in the back to take care of that. And within the parking lots, I've set up a space for a tram stop where some kind of transport system would be running on these rails to take you up to the main entrance of the park. This road goes along the west side of the zoo for about 500 meters until it gets to the front, where it loops around and can drop you off right at the gate. This spot also isn't too far from the city downtown and the train station, so here's also where all the pedestrian traffic would come from. The front gate of the zoo looks rather old-fashioned and small compared to what you'll eventually see from the rest of the zoo, but I've still kept it the same, as it looks kind of homely, and also how dramatic can you make the entrance of your typical zoo look like, while also keeping it realistic. This entrance square just beyond the gate lies decorated with a good plenty of oak trees and your basic park details, including benches, streetlights, and at the front, statues representing a panda and polar bear. Surrounding the area are some tame-looking single-storied buildings that fulfill the purposes that one could probably just guess. On the right is a series of restrooms and a general administration building, which in the back includes a small infirmary, because I suppose something like that would exist here. And on the left side here is a gift shop selling mostly mob heads, because I couldn't think of anything else to put in there, and a little hole-in-the-wall kind of restaurant with a couple table and chairs just in front of it. Now we move on to our first enclosure. This one at the front takes the form of an even circle and includes the main 4 of the basic passive overworld mobs. That is the cow, pig, sheep, and chicken. There is a large plain set up for them behind this fence where they'd typically be roaming, but this space in the front I've kept the possibility of being opened for both the animals and the visitors, since these first animals kind of give off the petting zoo vibes anyway. The next enclosure is set over here to the right, and it includes all of Minecraft's variants of equidae, such as the donkeys, mules, and horses, and that also includes the zombie and skeleton types. They're all set up in a biome pretty similar to the last one we saw, just being some simple plains. This one though is placed with the museum in the background and a river running through the middle. At this intersection, we have a small space for the rabbits, fittingly decorated with some carrot crops on this side and a couple holes leading to some underground burrows. I figured it'd be small enough to just fit right here in the middle of all of this. And then just up this hill is a small enclosure for the cats, which has a couple platforms and kind of fits nicely into the space I had available, but other than that I still think I made it just a bit too small. It is somewhat of a decent size, but I still really only put it here because it seemed just to be the only thing that I could put in that corner there. And over here on the other side are the slimes, and though it is meant to reflect a simple swamp biome, because of the size of the larger slimes, this is probably one of the larger enclosures on this side of the zoo. But I don't think that's completely necessary, since the slimes we got here have a habit of getting stuck in some of the trees and being stationary thereafter. Only the smaller ones are still hopping around. Now on this side, right on line with that first circular enclosure at the front, we have another smaller one. This one meant for the creepers, which just have some trees and some decorative ruins. But by these trees are a couple of stairs that lead to an underground section. And in here we have a large tinted window right along the wall to give visitors a real up close and probably quite dangerous view to these iconic beings in the realm of Minecraft. And now moving on from the creepers, we have our first of the many themed areas. This one is a building dedicated to several cave-themed mobs. These banners by the doors are supposed to read "The Cave," but it's not working since I got the ray tracing on. These doors here are the entrance, and it is sure quite dark in here, but I think it's enough for the most part for people to be able to see everything while also keeping up that cave aesthetic. First on the left are the bats, where most of them are a bit hard to make out because of how dark it gets in this corner. You can see a couple of them though. Then the next one on the right is for the zombies, which I went through and made the glass a little bit lighter, so at least you'll be able to see these ones. There's this first window here, and then going up this way takes you to, a closer look inside of it. You have like a separate cave area for the zombies, and that's kind of a similar thing with this side, which has the cave spiders. Looking into this one, the falling lava there makes all the details of the abandoned mine shaft and the cave spider enclosure a bit more easily apparent. At least you're pretty much able to see everything that's going on in there. And then over here on the other side are the silverfish. They're in this stronghold looking setup. You can see a couple of them are starting to like clip through the glass. I didn't mean for them all to get stuck there, but they've been doing that for a while. And then down this way to the end of the hall, we have the skeletons, which are again in just a simple like plains and cave setup. But the thing about this one is it's also got a window out here, which makes it visible from the outside as well. Probably a little bit less clear, but it's still there. And with that, we are now through the cave and we enter the next section, which is for the desert. Now I really only made this desert section because I felt like I just needed a good spot for the husks, a mob which I really haven't encountered in survival before, but felt like I needed a good place for them. They're the only ones that really do fit that desert theme, I think, or at least they look that way. But I just didn't want to leave this theme just up to one mob in particular, so on the other side, I decided I could fit the spiders in here as well. They got this large cave set up here, and then next to it is a bit of a desert. I also thought this was a good way of going about it, especially since this small cave section is right next to the cave building, and then that sort of blends in with this small section for the desert here. And that's really about it for the desert theme. We can go back up this path now, which will take us back to almost the plains theme. And in here we got a space for the Ravagers. It's a pretty simple one, but I love the way that I have that pillager outpost set up there among the typical landscape. It stays rather unassuming, but it still is the most unique part of it. Then next to that, just up this hill, we have a smaller, slightly elevated view for the slime enclosure. There's just enough space to squeeze this in, and I thought it was a nice small little detail. That would be better than just filling it up with trees and completely blocking it off, even though when you actually look inside it kind of already is cut off by trees. And then up here we have a space for the iron golems. There are only 2 of them in here, and it still looks pretty small, but it's about what I had for the space here. It would look a little bit better if they had some kind of village setup. I'm not too sure if I would have been able to fit anything like that in here, but I think what we got here is good enough. At least I suppose it's good enough for the fictitious well-being of those 2. And then past this, at the top of the hill, we have a small, almost food court-like area. You got your basic restrooms are on this side, and then over here, we have a couple small restaurants with some dining space in this square. And also on the back side of the museum, we have another smaller section just by where the cats were. And then also attached to that are some back doors leading into the museum. Then if we head back down from the hill, back in the way that we were first coming, this will lead us to our next themed area, which we'll be entering from here. This is the jungle section, characterized by its cobblestone paths and abundance of jungle trees in the area. This small closed-off area right next to the entrance, I mostly just put in here because I was originally going to have this as a placeholder for the bees, because they weren't yet in the game at the time where I built this. But since I found a spot for the bees somewhere else, I instead converted this into a small jungle themed area. There's a small pond in this corner with some coral inside, and then over here we have another panda statue like the one at the front. And then on the other side of the path, our first of the main jungle enclosures, we got this quite artistic setup for the ocelots with an interpretation over there of some kind of jungle temple ruins on the left, and then on the right are some platforms between the trees. There's also a small river running by this wall on the front, and a mostly normal looking jungle biome setup for the rest of the area. Then a bit farther down this hill, past this weird bend here, is a similar enclosure for the pandas. This one is a bit more bamboo focused and maybe a bit wider than the last one, but it still is mostly the same. The main difference is at the top of this hill, where we have this small building, and the indoor section is actually left open for some of the visitors. It's just a straight hallway inside with some tinted windows allowing you to look in here. The walls in this place also have a bit of a panda color pattern, which I can't quite remember if I did that intentionally, because it's been so long since I've built this, but I only just realized that recently. We'll go back up this path and around this corner to go back into the jungle, and here's where we got a small section for some restrooms there, and then right here is a large building for the birds. We're not going to go in this entrance though. I'm actually going to go down here and go around to the front. Down at the bottom here, there's a small gift shop there, and then over here is where it leads you to the desert area and also where the Ravagers, and then here is also the front entrance of the main bird enclosure, and this one is, I guess an aviary is what you would call it. It's quite the large building, but it still looks good and blends in really well, also serving as a good boundary between the jungle area and the other surrounding areas. On the inside, there's a pathway which takes you up one side, with the rainforest set up on this other side. There's a river which runs through it all, stopping at a waterfall in this corner. For some reason, also this is where most of the birds decided to set at. It's not even the cobwebs keeping them there, so I'm not too sure what that's all about. But all the landscaping in here, I think, kind of makes up for that. I'm quite happy with the way that I was able to put all this in here. Then these doors at the back take us to where we just were before, and with that we are through with the jungle section. That leads us to this intersection here, but first we'll check out this direction. We have some stairs down here which take you down to another intersection, and then past that is our next themed area. This one I called the Highlands. This first enclosure on the left you may have seen a little bit earlier when we were looking at the desert. This enclosure here is for the llamas. It consists of one mountainous rock in the middle, with a river along the front side, which is fed by a waterfall on this narrow side of the area, and then we got some more tame hills on this side, which is adjacent to the paths of the Highlands section. And then beyond that is an enclosure for the foxes in this corner, which in the last tour I made of this was under construction at the time because foxes weren't yet added to the game. But now that they're here, I've added this water in the front and a small forest in the back, giving off an almost similar look to a taiga biome, but I still thought they fit in well in the mountains area. And then on the other side here are the mushrooms, which are set up on this imitation of a mushroom island. Just a basic mycelium hill with some water on this side. Probably not the most interesting, but you gotta have it somewhere, and I just thought it fit in the best here. Now going back to the last intersection we were just at, is a building which you most likely would have noticed quite a while ago with just how much it stands out on this side of the zoo. This is what I like to call the Nether Castle. It's a building which includes all the older of the Nether mobs. There just wasn't enough space to put in all of the newer ones, so it's not all up to date with the recent updates. These doors on the right take you to the start of the loop that I have set up inside. There at the front is a Nether portal to set the theme. And then continuing to this side, on the right, we got the first of our enclosures. This one is shared with both the wither skeletons and the zombie piglins, I think is what they're now called. This space is meant to represent the basic landscape of the Nether and what you more commonly see there for a couple of the basic mobs. Then farther down the hallway, I have the blazes. They're set up in this small section of a Nether fortress, which is meant to be on some cliffs or maybe in a cave. Then finally next to that are the magma cubes, and they're in what's meant to be a swamp-like biome for the Nether. That's something that I think kind of exists in Minecraft now, but I think it wasn't at the time, so this environment is something that I made up to be fitting for this mob and also being unique from all the other ones in this building. And with that we are through the Nether Castle. These doors will take you back outside to this intersection, and then going back up these stairs will take us to the previous intersection, which will also take us to the next themed area. This next one here is for the Tundra, and it was originally the last one that I had on this half of the zoo when I made the last video. So this will be the last bit of the recap that I'm going through. This first enclosure on the side is for the snow golems, which are mostly based inside here, almost a similar building that we had with the pandas. This one basically has the look of a large refrigerator. Snow golems wouldn't really look all the best just wandering outside in the sun, so I have them in here just to enhance the realism. The snow golems are also damaged by the rain, so that's another reason why I decided to keep them inside. However, to the back part of the building, I do have this small open space where they can sort of roam about. It's connected to the inside part there, and there's also this wooden roof, which I think is enough to keep them covered from all the rain. Then on this other side is an entrance to the building for the polar bears, which is pretty similar to the last ones. We just have, a bit of a different setup for the walls. It still has that refrigerator look, but it's kind of fitting for the polar bears though. However, the majority of the polar bears I actually have set up around this other side where there's a larger enclosure set up for them. Down here at the end of the path is a wide look over all of it. And even in Minecraft, the polar bears don't usually live in a taiga kind of biome, which is kind of what all this is meant to represent, but considering the climate I've associated with this world, this seems to be the closest that I can make it while also keeping it realistic. And then if we go back up this path, on the other side is the enclosure for the wolves. This one's a bit narrow as I didn't have much space for it with the nether right behind it. A couple of them I have tamed, and I dyed the red color white so you're not going to see it. And I did this so I can have a couple of them sat around. In particular, there's one up on the rock there. This whole enclosure though is just another normal taiga biome. A few small details, but that's about it for the wolves, as well as the end for the tundra section. And now back at this intersection, we have reached the point where I've covered everything for the first section of the zoo. Everything you've seen since we entered, I have built over 3 years ago, and now we'll head in this direction and pick up on everything I've done since then. The majority of this new part I just built this past summer, with a couple parts from earlier on. Since I completely cut off any expansion in that direction, the only way to continue was to have it go along here. This here at the start is a fountain with a statue of a dolphin on top of it, serving as a tribute to this building right behind it, the aquarium. We're not yet going in there just yet, that's the front entrance there, but this path over on the side will take us to the other ends of the ocean themed section. Off to the side of this path here, I have a little lily pad set up, just because I felt like that was really all I had the space for here. It got quite narrow, so instead of just filling this up with trees or anything, let's put that in there because I thought it was a good idea. And then we got one small enclosure right here for a couple of tropical fish. And now over here at the back of the aquarium building, where everything widens up a little bit, we have one larger enclosure on this side, which is meant for the dolphins. I quite like the way all of this is set up with the curved walls of both the enclosure and the aquarium behind it. We have a couple of rings on the side here that dolphins would be able to jump through, or supposedly at least. I don't think they can actually do that in Minecraft even if they tried, but I thought it was a nice detail, so that's why I put them up there. Then over here on the other side of the path are the sea turtles, and they have a bit of a beach setup in here. It's a bit hard to see the water in this texture pack when it's just the sand underneath, but that's what it is in case you couldn't see it. There's some coral down at this end to give it a bit of color, and that's mostly about it for this one. Then when we go further down this path, we reach this small corner, which is just enough space for another small food court. You have some temporary establishments, a few more table and chairs over here, and quite the nice view of the bridge and the river running below. And here's a quick view of what the space all looks like from the outside. It's one of my favorite views of all of this, which is really the only reason why I'm including this shot here. As if the building didn't already look a lot like an aquarium by itself, the wave-like pattern of these paths outside really give it that look. And that just about does it for everything on the outside part of the aquarium section. We'll follow this path downwards to these doors. We'll eventually end up somewhere there eventually, but this is where we will start. This whole bottom section is for what I suppose would be the deep sea animals. It's a bit dark in all these enclosures, but inside this one on the left is for both the guardians and the elder guardians. It looks a little bit small in this corner, but it was just about able to fit in here with both the floor above and a small underground road, which I have below it. But I think I made it all work in this narrow space. And then over here on the other side, we have another pretty small one. This one is just for some variants of other small tropical fish. We have a lot of those around here. And then the final one on this bottom floor is this one, which takes up this whole wall. And this one's for a variety of the larger fish and the squids also. I think this one's a bit lighter than the other ones, so at least now you'll be able to see a bit more of the decoration in there. And that just about does it for all of the animals in the aquarium section. If we follow these stairs, it will take us back up to the main floor. Those doors you see right there are the main entrance to the aquarium. And then you'll see just a lot of these small fish enclosures just sort of scattered about, but it's just the same tropical fish that you'll see everywhere else. We'll start looking on this side, which is where we have a small little gift shop. It's a little bit difficult to find something in Minecraft that would look like a realistic thing to be in a gift shop, so I mostly just filled it with ocean stuff in here. I figured that would be convincing enough. And then out here, we have another set of doors which take you out of the gift shop. And then right here to the left, we have a bit of an open space with a couple large windows which overlook some of the river and the bridge which we saw earlier. But the main feature of this space is this big mess of quartz hanging from the ceiling. And if you weren't already able to tell, this is meant to be a whale skeleton. I think you might only be able to see it if you look at it at the right angle, but I still think it turned out pretty well. And it's a really nice detail to this part of the building that I wouldn't really know what to do with anyway. At that corner, there's a elongated staircase which leads up to this next floor. And then in here we have a couple more enclosures for a couple of various kinds of fish, but more interestingly, I got this tunnel which takes you right through it all. The reflectiveness of the glass in this texture pack is really showing, especially in this part, but that's just the reason why it's looking so gray. Occasionally you can see a couple fish swimming across that top bit, but unfortunately the most of them are just sort of stuck there on the bottom. This way will take you out from this tunnel, and there's a small railing over here overlooking the front entrance. And then over on this end is another railing which overlooks what I call the Aqua Theater. It's a bit of a performing center for the dolphins, and perhaps the most impressive part of the rooms in this building, which is why I've waited all this time before finally showing it. All of this wall on the top floor is left open for additional spectators in case all of that gets filled up, and all of the main seating here is accessible from a couple tunnels we got on the ground floor. And with that, we are about finished with the aquarium. We'll now head back out to the main path. It's a bit of a walk, so I figured I might as well just show you, just so you can kind of get a bit of a better perspective in terms of all of this. I'm sure the cuts are a bit confusing, but here are some of the tunnels I mentioned before and how you get out to the Aqua Theater. And then through here, this is the main doors, which take you right to this dolphin statue. And then we'll continue over this way to this next larger section of the zoo. This next section that we're now entering, I just completed recently, so I think I made it a little bit better. It's a bit more interesting and well built, so I'm a bit more proud to show all of this off. This first section that we see right here is your basic park facilities. Over there you got a small restaurant, and then a space for eating in front of it, a set of restrooms there, and also off in the distance is a small administration building with just some basic stuff inside of it, so I'm not going to bother going in there. As we get to the end of the path, there is another bigger restaurant down this way, right by the entrance to the end building beyond it. I was originally looking at a couple more restaurants like this around the area, just a bit smaller, but since I ended up making this one so much larger, that's really all I had the space for. It doesn't really match any of the surrounding themed areas, but I think I also made it somehow look like a building that could fit quite well into a zoo, so I think it blends in pretty well there. Now we'll enter this next part at the end of this narrow, quaint-looking path. We'll have a couple enclosures here for some of the amphibious animals. On the left side here, or on the right side from where we came, are the axolotls, where I got all the variants except for the blue ones, of course. I think they're normally found in the lush caves, so that's what I tried doing with the enclosure, in every aspect aside from the cave part. And then on the other side of that, over here, I have the frogs and the tadpoles too, originally, but I think they're not there anymore. And another small detail about these two enclosures is that there are a couple tunnels that sort of lead into each other. There's glass on the ground, giving you a bit of a view of it from above. And I figured they were pretty similar, so it could make sense for them to almost share the same space. But the real reason behind it was just I wanted something interesting for these two enclosures, aside from just what they already got. That path right there leads back to the aquarium, and then if we go back down this way, this will take us to the bees. which were originally going to be somewhere off in the jungle section like I mentioned before, but since I had the space here and some gardens set up right over there, which we'll get to later, I thought this would be quite the perfect alternative. The beehives on the trees and the abundance of flowers I have in here makes me think that they'll all stay in here and not fly away. At least I think. I haven't seen any of them do that just yet, so I think it's good enough. Then moving on from the bees, we'll continue down this path. That leads over to the gardens, which we'll get to soon enough, but now we'll head over to this building, which I have designated for the end. This building is for the end dimension, not the end of this video. We're almost there though, don't worry. The look of this building is meant to be your basic architectural representation of what the end island is supposed to look like, with the obsidian pillars along the front being pretty obvious, and then the roof of the end bricks on top generally takes up the shape similar to the typical end island's shape and topography. And then the abstract windows on the side are just sort of meant to be like the weird crooked cliffs and the caves that you'll sometimes see on the side of the end island, and just serves as a good bit of a contrast to the smooth surface that you'll find on top. And that's about all that's interesting for this building. As you can see when we get inside, it's quite small and quiet in here. On the right side are the shulkers, which remain completely stationary in their end castle and end ship setup. And then over here on the other side, this is supposed to be for the endermites, but it seems that they have a habit for burying themselves into the end stone, or at least I think that's what happens. The name tags don't really work, so I guess I just have to say these guys are sleeping right now. And then over here is a space for the ender dragon egg, because of course I didn't have the space for an actual ender dragon, so we just got the egg on display there. And that just about does it for the end building. These doors here will take you out the backside, and here we have finally the last enclosure of the zoo, or at least the last outdoor one. We still got some more past there, and this one is especially reserved for the goats. Of course, I had to have a long build up for this one. My channel name kind of demands it. This single enclosure is the only one that's part of the unofficial mountains themed area that I made, characterized mostly by this wooden bridge which takes you across it. It's a pretty nice looking enclosure and also adds some good aesthetic to the mountain look of this space, which I ended up being pretty happy with. And then at the other end of the goat's enclosure, here is our final building. This one is almost like another cave building, but I like to think it could be an addition to the mountains area. The look of this building on the outside I think gives off that idea fairly well. Now I tried to be a bit creative when designing this building. I didn't want it to look too much like a normal building, but also not overly natural, and unlike the end building, which had all of this clever interpretation of the environment that I was trying to portray, this one for the mountain cave is just more of like a modern art piece. There's no doors on this building just because I wasn't able to find a way to make it work, but when you go in here we just have a simple hallway with a couple enclosures off to the sides. The first one we'll look at is here on the left, because I suppose I'll just take care of this first because there's nothing in here. This one was originally meant to be for the warden, but either it's buried away somewhere into the ground or simply despawns, because after I pull it in there, it usually doesn't stick around for very long. And then following that, we have a space for the glow squids, and they probably would work a little better back at the aquarium, which isn't too far away from here, but I think this does fit though as a good change in scenery in this building and in the pace of as you're walking through the zoo. And then finally over in this other corner we have just enough space for the allays or allays, I'm not too sure, maybe that's how it's said, where they simply are just floating around about the stalactites. It is a bit of an uninteresting one to end off on, but this was really the last thing I had on the list. Everything else was I didn't have the space for otherwise, or just sort of wouldn't fit in an enclosure anyway. And then if we go out these doors, this will take us out to the back end of the building, and that will lead us into the final section, which I have back here, which is for the gardens. This garden space was originally going to be a lot smaller, but since it turned out so well, I just kept adding to it. We've gone down that pathway here over to this entrance, which is where I assume the majority of the people would enter the gardens from. Now this space is kind of meant to be some kind of like botanical gardens, and my original plan was to have it like a lot smaller than it actually was, but since it turned out so well, I just kind of kept adding to it. It's filled with most of Minecraft's natural elements. I think at least I got all of the plants, but more impressively is just the look of this place, which I mostly built without any reference or inspiration. Really all just sort of happened. A good lot of the paths just sort of surrounding the area are rather basic. They just sort of do the job of adding some more trees to it. But over here I have like different areas sort of scattered within it. This first one on the right is where we have like a small display for the little mushroom biome. Then from there, further down this path, we have a small pond, which is surrounded by a wide mix of vegetation. The almost Japanese-looking bridge in the middle makes for a pretty nice detail, and these stone slabs going onto the water on this side are really just there as an art piece, but I think I've seen something like that before in real life. I couldn't quite remember or guess what it'd be called. And then going onto the bridge, there's a little bit of a hedge archway right down there, which takes you right back into the zoo. Then in there we just have a wide mix of just sort of trying to fit in every type of piece of vegetation that Minecraft could offer, even if it's just like in small pieces there. And then over here on the other side we have what I really could only call like a riverside monument. The main purpose of this garden section is really just to look pretty, so when I had this space open up by the water to build something, I thought a build like this would kind of perfectly fit in. There are some decorative fountains here in the middle, and then on the left is a statue of an axolotl, and on the right is a statue of the goat. A fun little callback to those statues I had at the front of the zoo, but these ones are for the ones around this part. And if we go through here, we'll get to the back part of the gardens, and to fill in the rest of this space, I've put in a large flower field. And aside from the trees and the head sculptures and all the other decorations, what I think is the real best looking part of this are the dynamic color patterns I've made with all the different flowers, which make it look a lot better than just having maybe just one kind of flower to cover the whole space, or just sort of have them all scattered around randomly. I'm really happy with the way it ended up looking, and makes for a nice peaceful end to the zoo. With kind of the same vibe as a charming end credits scene. Makes for quite the lovely end for this build, and also for this tour. Now, I'm not really one to have favorites for things, but this zoo would most likely be my favorite thing I've ever built on Minecraft. There's a reason why it is both so massive while also being in a state of completion, which is, quite a rarity for the other larger buildings in this world. Firstly, I'm beyond content with how it looks. I feel it never gets too grand or too boring. It's something that looks great when quickly flying over, and also when walking through any part of it. It's like the perfect continuation of the idea I've had with the buildings in this whole city to begin with, which is to make them beautiful and interesting at every scale and angle you look at it. And secondly, it was always just kind of fun to build. I only spent around 6 months building the most of it, and it's now at a reasonable state of completion. Some of my other more impressive builds in this world are nowhere close to being to that same level of like a time spent to amount built ratio. Whenever I started working on this project again, I'd always find myself wanting to spend more time getting it done, and like it was never boring or tedious, and I always seemed to know exactly what to do next with it. It was easily the most stress-free piece of art, in quotations, I think I could ever make. And now at the end of it all, I'm quite proud with how it turned out, with both the journey and the destination with this build being quite perfect. And now we're finally at the end of this video. Thanks for sticking around if you made it this far. Since there was so much to cover, I tried to make this video concise, but it still ended up being somewhere like 25 minutes long. But that's an improvement compared to the last one I made at the zoo 3 years ago, which only covered the first half in like around 30 minutes. I also wanted to make this video a bit better looking, as I think this very well could at some point become the most popular video on my channel. So unlike the scriptless, uncut walkthrough I made of the zoo last time that now sits at over 200,000 views, this video should be a much better introduction for anyone coming across my channel. I'll have some more videos coming out pretty soon. This one's late simply because of how long it is and how long it took to make, but hopefully I can get back to something rather consistent a bit soon. And now, finally, I want to thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you all later. Bye!